The PS Vita was a successor to the moderately popular PlayStation Portable, PSP. It was meant to expand upon the PSP's idea of console gaming on the go. More advanced hardware, graphical capabilities in between the PS2 and PS3, PS3 ports and crossplay with said console, big name releases to prove this was meant to be a legitimate console gaming on the go. Games such as Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, Borderlands 2, Uncharted. I got a 3DS! Twice. The PlayStation Vita, when it's brought up, is either to be described as the embodiment of mismanagement, how Sony gave up on the console too quickly without putting a serious effort on its first party lineup and a proper marketing to make it seem more appealing, or Son, I'm disappointed in you, get the hell out of my house! Ah hell, I need a place to crash for the night. It was released almost a year after its main competitor, the Nintendo 3DS, on February 22, 2012, and unlike the 3DS, it offered specs that were more comparable to a high-end smartphone of the time. It had a 5-inch OLED screen until the slim revision, some models had 3G access through AT&T in the USA, a great D-pad for fighting games and side-scrollers, 2 joysticks, was a comfortable size to hold, it had everything to be the worthy successor to a much beloved PSP. I must admit, as a 3DS owner who brought the handheld just to play a pre-order version of a game I had already played, I was kinda jelly, but Sony had to get greedy. The name Vita meaning life is already ironic in itself. It was meant to be released in early to mid-2011 in Japan, but the 2011 Japanese earthquakes postponed its release as the public eye was much more concerned with this catastrophe. It ended up being released in late 2011 over there. The first sign that the Vita was going to have a hard time gaining mainstream appeal was the need for a memory card. Unlike SD cards, Vita proprietary memory cards are thrice as expensive, with the 64GB one costing half the price of the Vita itself. What the hell? Considering how Sony sold their games through their PSN store, this was already a bad move, especially when accounting for updates and DLC. Sony replaced the memory stick with this much smaller and encrypted memory card, since the memory stick saw third-party versions that had mini and micro SD card slots, making it much cheaper to just buy it and some SD cards instead of buying the official one in the long run. By not giving the customer the option of a third-party storage device, Sony was already alienating their potential audience. But boy, what about that marketing? That wonderful marketing. Why does that lady have tits on her back? That was the second sign, the marketing. Sony simply did not know how to market their target audience anymore. The console itself tries to be a smartphone with its slide menu and the games serving as apps, but most casual PSP owners who only use the device as a glorified MP4 already own smartphones. Plus, if you wanted to transfer music or movies to your Vita, it wasn't as simple as just plugging your Vita to your PC and just dragging and dropping. Nope, Sony decided to go the Apple way and forced people into use a clunky content manager that makes you lose faith in humanity tenfold every time you have to use it. Not everything was horrible though. Unlike the PSP's awful UMDs, the Vita used more convenient cartridges, which means even if the console was shaken, there wouldn't be any skipping or disc scratching. This was a great move that at least shows they were listening to some of the complaints people had about the PSP, at least at a hardware level, including also the additions of the right stick for camera movement in 3D games. It had a way better online infrastructure than the 3DS, with many games taking good use of it. Nintendo at this point had Monster Hunter as an exclusive title for their platforms around this time, while the Vita had the God Eater games and Soul Sacrifice Delta. You know, that one game by Keiji Inafune after he left Capcom? The really good one? The one no one talks about? Oh, okay. Speaking of games, let's check out that release library, shall we? Of note, we have Uncharted Golden Abyss, Wipeout 2048, Blaze Blue Continuous Shift Extend, Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, Disgaea 3 Absence of Detention,
Ridge Racer,
Rayman Origins. Pretty solid stuff, but we also see more casual oriented games like Plants vs. Zombies swept in. The kind of game no one will buy a Vita for when they already have a smartphone. But the rest is really good. They showcase they're serious about selling the Vita as a home console experience on the go, but they also wanted to capitalize on the increasing ownership of smartphones, while not realizing people were buying them for being convenient. Something the Vita definitely wasn't. Had the Vita been released near the 3DS's release window, the Vita might have overtook it with games of this caliber, while the 3DS upon release only had of actual note Ocarina of Time 3D. But by the next year, the 3DS was deeply established as a handheld of choice. Sony had an uphill battle. They may dominate home consoles, but portables have always been Nintendo's turf. That and Nintendo has a Pokemon money printing machine on their side. I mean, come on, goddamn Yellow Rat prints money. And that's not to say there wasn't an attempt early on. Gravity Rush, Tearaway, Killzone Mercenary, the HD remasters of God of War and Sly Cooper. Hell, they even got to convince Gearbox to get Borderlands 2 working on the damn thing. It even had a special edition console bundled with the game. But while these are great games, they were also games that either failed to connect with the public or are available on home consoles people already owned. And this is something that Sony didn't fully understand. Sure, there was a cross-buy option. When you buy a game digitally, you get it both on your PS3/PS4 and your Vita, but I think the device lacked sorely was exclusives with a more mainstream appeal. Because if you're a disgusting weeaboo like me, oh boy was this a handheld of your dreams! Okay, let's begin properly. The Atelier games on PS3 were pretty good RPGs, even if the Atelier franchise doesn't have the same sort of brand recognition like other RPGs like the Tales of series has. But the Vita saw expanded portable ports of these PS3 games with loads of new content as well as original entries in the franchise. Persona 4 Golden, the very first game I got for my Vita, it remains the Vita's highest rated game of all time. Introduced new content, a new dungeon with a whole new scenario, new social links, and overall a banging experience that made it worth replaying it, even if you already had played the original. Surprisingly, this version of the game remains exclusive to a Vita, requiring an investment of a Vita or a PS TV to play. Hyperdimension Neptunia and Neptunia Mark II on PS3 were rough games to say the least. So Idea Factory and Compile Heart just say, "F it, let's just make remakes of them using the engine of the one NEP game that was good." And thus we got the Rebirth games, and yeah, 2 and 3 are just asset recycling, but they're fun in a really dumb way. I just love these characters, and thus began the age of the Vita becoming a panty quest whip machine. Criminal Girls Invite Only is an expanded remake of a Japan-only PSP title that I am not allowed to stream on Twitch, and Moe Chronicles is a game that not only you have to import from freaking China to play, it also makes me feel I'll get arrested by doing so. Senran and Kagura came out on 3DS first because of the dream of a man of having TNA in 3D, but it certainly got more risque on Vita and PS4. And it just kept pushing the envelope further. Hyperdimension Neptunia U Action Unleashed, Valkyrie Drive, Senran Kagura Estival Versus just wanted to push it really hard to extend an M rating will allow. Or before Sony went full
Won't somebody please think of the children?
And censor everything. Not everything was Panty Quest pandering though. The Ease games are genuinely great, and thanks to PSN giving the Vita a form of backwards compatibility with PSP games, you could play most of the Ease series in a single device, as well as Nihon Falcom's other respected RPGs in the system, The Legend of Heroes, Trails of the Cold Steel. Final Fantasy Adventures saw a remake on this console as Adventures of Mana, which is fine, but it also came out on smartphones. If it was a Vita exclusive, they could have used the power of the Vita much better for this remake, instead of having to take into account the limitations of a smartphone. Mana deserves better. In fact, another thing stacked against the Vita was that it came out during a time when for some reason developers were also tinkering with the idea of cramming actual video game experiences on smartphones, with god-awful touch controls.
Ah shit, here we go again.
At the time, people believed the age of dedicated handhelds was over and people would only play on smartphones. A shame really, because stuff like BlazBlue, Chrono Phantasma Extend and basically any side-scroller is really comfortable to play with the Vita's actual buttons, while stuff like Hotaru no Nikki that made better use of the Vita's touchscreen and back panel remained really unknown. A combination of lack of marketing and interest. In E3 2015, sadly, Sony declared the Vita as merely a legacy system, effectively killing the system. However, the system will still be manufactured and third parties will still release games on the Vita, and thus continue the Vita's existence now as a glorified accessory to a successful PS4, allowing for remote play as long as there is a strong enough connection, and a machine full of indie titles and niche games such as roguelikes and RPGs, which is fine, don't get me wrong, but a new breath of life will soon come to it. Out of the blue, a group of homebrewers collectively known as Molecule appeared, claiming they had a method to run homebrew software. They called this Henkaku, which was to be released on the following day, July 29. It was the most exciting Vita news ever since it was declared a legacy console, and this group had confirmed it was to be used on version 3.60, the last test Vita firmware at the time. This molecule group, which consisted of Davy, Proxima, Xyz, and prominent scene figure Yifan Lu, issued as challenge to people to figure out how Henkaku worked, calling this the King of the Hill challenge. All bets were off. It was the birth of a true homebrew on the Vita. The birth of the homebrew scene for the Vita was an exciting time that introduced me to Layers of White. Dear Lord, I'm a degenerate. Many things happened very early on, such as the encryption of files and backup methods, albeit from what I gather really dodgy ones. Even a few deliberate breakers were released into the wild around that time. As homebrew developers began working on this challenge and as time progressed, the full extent of the console's potential was at the fingertips of those with interest in it. Suddenly, custom themes for the console's UI, gameplay capturing via USB, and unofficial game patches were possible for everyone. Possibly the best thing to come out of this, however, was SD to Vita, an adapter that could be used on Vita with the correct software installed by going into the cartridge slot. This was a blessing to many people who wanted cheaper storage or simply had their memory cards die up, since honestly, those memory cards weren't exactly the highest quality made storage media. However, RIP patch was a godsend. It allowed you to run stuff like game mods and English translations. I for one do not own a PS4 and was bummed with the Vita version of Dragon Quest Heroes 2 being only in Japanese. Leave it to the sim people to make a translation patch, among other things. And here we are now, 2019. The production of Vita consoles and games has ceased, and even the Vita version of Bloodstained was cancelled. That's a shame, but at least the Vita ended its life with some cool releases: Valkyria Revolution, Is 8 Lacrimosa of Dana, and Konosuba Labyrinth of Hope. Hopefully an internet hero will make an English patch for the latter. My Japanese is not that great. The Vita was a great little piece of hardware that had everything to become a serious competitor to the 3DS, but instead became a niche machine mistreated by Sony's greed and anti-consumer decisions. It's an amazing mirror to the Wii U, which had the first-party support but not the third-party to carry it. I guess I just feel attracted to underdog consoles. But you know what? I love it the way it is. I love the library of games it had, I love how nice it feels to hold and play with it, the PSP backwards compatibility via either PSN or homebrew methods, the RPGs I experienced, it even has Toho for crying out loud. It's amazing how, in many ways, Nintendo's Switch is more of the spiritual successor to its handheld than to the 3DS or Wii U. It was a little handheld that almost cooled, but it had a high attach rate among its small and dedicated user base, higher than the 3DS had, so that has to count for something, right? I also love the anime too. Thank you so much for watching, I hope you liked the video. If you're a fellow weeb and you're interested, I did an essay of how it was to grow up in Mexico in the 90s. There was anime, a ton of it. Also, did you have a Vita or were interested in it? Let me know in the comments below. You could also, click that subscribe button. Do it for Nepgear. Look at her, you can't say no to her. Don't make her cry. Anime titties!